welcome everyone to Gaming Lore for Sleep, a place where we trade the rush of gameplay for the quiet pulse of story, where the goal isn't victory, but rest. If you're ready to unwind, to let the tensions of the day drift away, you've come to the right place. Find a comfortable position, close your eyes if you wish, and let your mind be transported. Tonight, we gather around a digital campfire to hear a foundational tale, not of a hero fully formed, but of a survivor in the making. We journey back to the very beginning, to the origin of one of gaming's most iconic and enduring figures, Lara Croft. But we won't be following the seasoned Tomb Raider with her dual pistols and unshakable confidence. Instead, we will meet a young woman named Lara, a bright archaeology student on a research trip to the perilous Himalayas. This is the story of a single, catastrophic event that shattered one life and forged another. A story of how a plane crash in the most remote mountains on Earth became the crucible that created a legend. So let the sounds of this distant, snowy wilderness relax you. Let the rhythm of this story become your own. Settle in, breathe deeply, and let's journey together to a time before the tombs, before the treasures, to a moment of sheer survival where it all began. Chapter 1: The Crucible of Ice and Metal. The world dissolved into a screaming chaos of shearing metal and shattered glass. One moment, Lara Croft was a bright, if somewhat restless, archaeology student gazing out at the majestic, snow-capped peaks of the Himalayas. And the next, she was a ragdoll in a spinning, disintegrating tin can. The small plane, a twin-propeller charter, had flown directly into a violent, unpredicted storm, and the mountain, a silent, ancient god of stone and ice, had reached out and swatted it from the sky. The initial impact was a deafening roar that swallowed all other sound, a brutal introduction to the unforgiving nature of the remote wilderness she had so eagerly sought to explore with her mentor, the famed Professor von Croy. The fuselage shrieked in protest as it tore itself apart against the unyielding rock. The fragile human lives inside utterly at the mercy of physics and fate. When the terrible, grinding noise finally ceased, the silence that rushed in to fill the void was almost more terrifying. It was a deep, profound quiet, broken only by the moan of the wind through the torn aluminum skin of the wreckage and the soft, insidious hiss of snow beginning to blanket the scene. Lara hung upside down, suspended by her seatbelt, her world inverted. Blood pounded in her head, and a sharp, stabbing pain in her ribs made every breath a conscious, agonizing effort. Through the gaping hole where the cockpit had once been, she could see nothing but a dizzying, gray abyss, a void of cloud and certain death that seemed to suck all warmth and hope from the air. A cold, primal fear gripped her, its icy fingers tightening around her heart, whispering that this was an anonymous, frozen end, slowly fighting against the disorientation and the screaming pain in her side. Her training and innate fortitude began to surface. Panic was a luxury that would kill her faster than the cold. numb, fumbling fingers, she groped for the seatbelt clasp, her movements clumsy and thick. The metal was freezing, searing her skin, but after a few desperate seconds, the mechanism released with a definitive click, and she crumpled in a heap onto what was now the ceiling of the shattered cabin. The impact sent a fresh jolt of white-hot agony through her ribs, but it also sharpened her senses, anchoring her firmly in the grim reality of her situation. She was alive. That was the first and only fact that mattered. Pushing herself up onto her hands and knees, she took her first real stock of the tomb that had been made of their aircraft. The scene was one of utter devastation, a landscape of twisted metal, snarled wiring, and scattered personal effects made meaningless by the crash. A few feet away, she saw Professor Von Croy, pale and grimacing, pinned by a collapsed section of the fuselage. His leg was clearly broken, the angle all wrong, and his eyes, usually so full of fiery intelligence, were wide with a pain and fear she had never seen in him before. "Lara," he managed to whisper, his voice thin and strained, a sound that was somehow more frightening than the roar of the crash itself. His vulnerability was a chilling testament to the severity of their predicament. The biting cold was already seeping deep into her bones, a relentless enemy that promised a slow, numb demise. She knew, with a cold clarity that cut through the last remnants of shock, that no rescue was coming. They were off course, lost in one of the most vast and inhospitable mountain ranges on Earth. The outside world had no idea where they were. Their survival depended entirely on what they could do in these next few minutes and hours. This realization did not bring despair, but instead triggered a fundamental shift within her. The theoretical discussions in lecture halls, the carefully mapped ruins, the dry academic texts, all of it fell away, leaving only the raw, immediate needs of the present moment. Ignoring the protests of her own injured body, she began to move. She crawled over the jagged debris, her hands growing raw and cold, her breath plumbing in the freezing air. She found a first aid kit, miraculously intact, and used a strip of fabric torn from a seat cushion to fashion a crude sling for Von Croy. She spoke to him in a low, steady voice, more to calm herself than him, assuring him they would find a way out. Every movement was a lesson, every decision a matter of life and death. The scared student who had boarded the plane was gone, her old self left behind in the moment of impact, a memory already being buried by the falling snow. As she managed to free Von Croy and help him into a more sheltered part of the wreckage, she looked out once more at the forbidding landscape. The mountain had tried to kill them, and it had very nearly succeeded. But as she stood there, shivering in the freezing wind, a new emotion began to kindle alongside the fear and the pain. It was a spark of defiance, a cold, hard resolve. This was not an end. It was a brutal, unasked-for beginning. The mountain was no longer just a beautiful, distant thing to be studied. It was an adversary, a puzzle of survival, and she was determined to solve it. Chapter 2. the language of the wild. The first night was an eternity of shivering darkness, a desperate battle against the cold that sought to steal the very life from their bodies. Huddled with Von Croy in the most sheltered corner of the wrecked fuselage, Lara used everything she could find: insulation torn from the walls, a torn tarpaulin, their own packed luggage, to create a fragile cocoon against the elements. Sleep was impossible, a dangerous temptation that could lead to a permanent frozen slumber. So she focused on the rhythm of her own breathing, on the faint, labored sounds from Von Croy, using them as an anchor to the world of the living. The howling wind became the only language, a constant reminder of their isolation and the sheer, immense power of the natural world they had so arrogantly intruded upon. Dawn broke with a pale, weak light that did little to warm the air, but it brought the precious gift of visibility. Lara, stiff and sore in every muscle, crawled from their makeshift shelter to survey their position. The plane had come to rest on a narrow, snow-covered ledge, a precarious balcony overlooking a vast, mist-filled chasm. Above them, the mountain rose in a series of sheer, ice-glazed cliffs, seemingly insurmountable. Below, the void. Their only possible path, it seemed, was along the ledge itself, which appeared to curve around the mountain's shoulder and out of sight. It was a thin, faint hope, but it was all they had. Returning to Von Croy, she shared her assessment in a calm, measured tone, already adopting the role of leader that circumstance had thrust upon her. Their supplies were scant. From the wreckage, she salvaged a half-empty canteen of water, a few granola bars, the first aid kit, and a multi-tool she found in a pilot's bag. Most crucially, she found a flint in Von Croy's own belongings, a relic from his earlier, more hands-on expeditions. It was a small, cold piece of metal, but in her hands, it felt like a promise of future warmth, a tiny spark of modern technology that could fight back against the ancient cold. She packed these few items meticulously into a single backpack, her movements deliberate and efficient. Every object was weighed for its utility, for its potential to sustain life. There was no room for sentimentality here. Professor Von Croy's condition was deteriorating. The pain from his broken leg was a constant torment, and the first signs of shock were setting in. Lara knew they could not stay. Using a length of piping torn from the wreckage and more strips of fabric, she constructed a rudimentary splint for his leg. The process was agonizing for him, but he bore it with a gritted silence, his eyes watching her with a new, pained respect. She was no longer just his promising student. She was his only chance for survival. With immense effort, she helped him to stand, supporting his weight on her own injured frame. And together, they took the first, faltering steps away from the wreckage, leaving the metal tomb behind. Their progress along the ledge was painfully slow, a grueling shuffle through deep, unstable snow. Each step was a battle against fatigue, pain, and the treacherous footing. Lara's entire world shrank to the few feet of ground in front of her, to the weight of Von Croy leaning on her shoulder, to the burning in her lungs with each thin, icy breath. She learned to read the snow, to test it with the pipe before committing their full weight, to listen for the sinister whisper that warned of a hidden crack or a loose stone. The theoretical concepts of archaeology were replaced by the immediate, physical language of the wild. The meaning of different cloud formations, the direction of the wind, the way sound carried in the thin air. After what felt like an age, the ledge began to widen, eventually opening onto a small, sheltered cave mouth, hidden from above and below by an overhang of rock. It was a perfect, if stark, refuge. Helping Von Croy inside, she set about making it habitable. She gathered what dry twigs and lichen she could find from the lee side of rocks, and with numb, fumbling hands, she struck the flint. It took dozens of attempts, but finally, a spark caught on a tuft of dry moss, blossoming into a tiny, fragile flame. She nurtured it with the tenderness of a parent, feeding it slowly until it grew into a small but steady fire. The warmth it provided was more than just physical. It was a psychological victory, a tiny beacon of defiance against the immense, cold indifference of the mountain. As the fire crackled, casting flickering shadows on the cave wall, a semblance of calm settled over them. They melted snow for water and shared a granola bar. Von Croy, warmed and marginally more comfortable, fell into a fitful sleep. Lara sat by the entrance, watching the stars emerge, brilliant and cold in the thin atmosphere. The paralyzing fear was gone, replaced by a weary but deep-seated confidence. She had assessed, adapted, and overcome. She had provided shelter, water, and fire. The mountain had thrown its worst at her, and she had not only endured, she had fought back. In the quiet of that Himalayan night, surrounded by immense danger, Lara Croft discovered a fundamental truth about herself. She was a survivor. Chapter 3, The Whisper of Stone. The second day dawned clearer, the storm having exhausted its fury and moved on, leaving behind a world of breathtaking, lethal beauty. The sky was a sharp, brilliant blue, and the sun reflecting off the endless snow was blinding. Lara fashioned a pair of crude snow goggles from a strip of leather from her pack, and two narrow slits cut from a piece of black plastic, her ingenuity flourishing in the face of necessity. Von Croy was in no state to travel far, so she decided to scout ahead alone, hopping to find a path to lower, safer ground. Leaving him with the remaining supplies and the fire, she ventured out from the cave, the multi-tool and the metal pipe her only weapons, moving with a newfound caution born of her first-hand experience with the mountain's treachery. She followed the natural contour of the rock face. Her archaeologist's eye, trained to see patterns and anomalies, began to notice things a less observant person would miss. The way certain rocks were stacked, the subtle wear on a particular part of the ledge. It was not the work of nature. It was a trail, ancient and nearly erased by time and weather, but a trail nonetheless. Her heart beat a little faster. This was no longer just a desperate struggle for survival. It was a discovery. She was following in the footsteps of those who had come this way before, Long, long ago, the path led her upwards, not down, winding its way cleverly through a labyrinth of giant boulders. It was counterintuitive, but she trusted the subtle signs, the ghost of the path that only she could see. After an hour of careful climbing, the way was blocked by a massive slab of rock, seemingly a dead end. But something felt wrong. The air current here was different. There was a faint, almost imperceptible breath of warmer air emanating from a narrow crack between the slab and the cliff face. It was a hidden entrance. Using all her strength, she leveraged the metal pipe into the crack and pushed, her muscles straining against the immense weight of the stone. With a low, grinding groan that spoke of centuries of stillness, the slab pivoted inward, just enough for her to slip through. She found herself not on another ledge, but in a man-made passageway, dark, cold, and utterly silent. The air was still and carried the dry, dusty scent of great age. Her flint sparked in the darkness, and using a makeshift torch from a wrapped, resinous piece of wood from her pack, she illuminated the space. The walls were smooth, carved with a precision that spoke of advanced skill, and adorned with faded paintings depicting a stylized sun and scenes of mountain life. She had not just found a path, she had found a tomb, a temple, or perhaps both. A secret place forgotten by the world. Every sense was heightened. The silence was a physical presence, thick and watchful. The flickering torchlight danced over the walls, making the ancient figures seem to move. She moved forward slowly, her booted feet making no sound on the stone floor. This was what she had dreamed of, what she had studied in books, the thrill of being the first person to lay eyes on a lost piece of history in countless generations. But the context was entirely different. This was not a supervised dig. It was a solitary, dangerous exploration. The stakes were her life, and the reward was knowledge itself. A secret wrested from the grip of the mountain that had tried to kill her. Passage opened into a single, circular chamber. In the center, on a stone dais, lay a skeleton, its bones ivory white in the torchlight. It was adorned with the remnants of fine jewelry, turquoise and beaten gold, and beside it lay a ceremonial dagger, its blade still sharp, its hilt inlaid with a single, large piece of lapis lazuli. This was no common traveler. This was a person of great importance, laid to rest in this high, lonely place. Lara felt no fear, only a profound respect. She was an intruder here, a guest in someone's eternal resting place. She did not touch anything. The value was not in the object, but in the story, in the connection to a human life lived millennia ago. She spent a long time in that chamber, memorizing the paintings, the architecture, the placement of the artifacts. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated discovery that temporarily eclipsed the direness of her situation. When she finally turned to leave, she felt changed once more. She had come into this mountain as a victim of a crash, but she was leaving this tomb as an explorer. The world was not just a place to be studied from books. It was a place of hidden wonders and deep, ancient secrets waiting for those with the courage and the wit to find them. She slipped back out into the blinding daylight, sealing the ancient door behind her, carrying the secret of the tomb within her, a new source of strength for the journey ahead. Chapter 4. The Weight of a Soul. Returning to the cave, Lara found Von Croy awake, his fever slightly worse. He listened rapt as she recounted her discovery, his academic passion momentarily overriding his pain. A Himba burial site at this altitude, Lara, that is, unprecedented, he whispered, his voice full of wonder. Her find was a beacon of hope, proof that this mountain was not just a death trap, but a place of history and passage. It meant there might be a way through, but the brief intellectual excitement couldn't mask the grim reality of their physical state. Their food was nearly gone, and Von Croy's condition meant he could go no further on his own. The responsibility for both their lives rested squarely and heavily on her shoulders. That night, as Von Croy slept fitfully, Lara sat by the fire, the multi-tool in her hand. Her gaze fell upon the metal pipe, and then on the few remaining pieces of fabric from the plane seats. An idea, desperate and dangerous, began to form. She couldn't carry Von Croy, but perhaps she could create something that would help him move. Working by the flickering firelight, her hands numb with cold and fatigue, she began to dismantle and reshape the material she had. Using the multi-tool, she bent the pipe into a rough, rectangular frame, lashing the joints tight with strips of fabric. It was crude, ugly, and brutally simple, but it was a sledge, a means to drag the professor rather than carry him. The following morning, she explained her plan. Von Croy looked at the crude contraption with a mixture of skepticism and despair, but he had no better alternative. Transferring him onto the sledge was an agonizing process, but once he was settled, bundled in the remaining tarpaulin, Lara took the lead ropes she had fashioned and began to pull. The strain was immense. Every muscle in her back, legs, and shoulders screamed in protest. The sledge snagged on rocks, bogged down in deep snow, and threatened to tip over on the uneven ground. It was a torturously slow way to travel, a battle of sheer, dogged willpower against the relentless drag of gravity and terrain. They retraced the path Lara had scouted, past the hidden tomb and onwards, following the ancient trail as it began a gradual, winding descent. The landscape started to change subtly. The air, while still freezing, felt slightly thicker, and the vegetation became less sparse. They saw the first stunted, wind-twisted trees, a sight that filled Lara with a surge of hope so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. They were descending. They were leaving the realm of the absolute summit, the domain of rock and ice, and entering a world where life, however tenacious, could still cling on. It was on this descent that they encountered their first true physical obstacle since the crash, a deep, wide crevasse, hidden by a lip of snow until they were almost upon it. It spanned their entire path, a jagged wound in the glacier that seemed to plunge into the very heart of the mountain. There was no way around it. To go back was to accept death. The only way was across, A single ancient tree, petrified by time and weather, formed a natural bridge, but it was narrow, unstable, and slick with ice. It was a test of faith as much as balance. Lara went first, inching her way across the precarious bridge, her arms outstretched for balance, her heart hammering in her chest. One misstep, one sudden shift of the brittle wood, and she would be gone. She made it to the other side, her legs trembling with adrenaline. Then came the true test, getting Von Croy and the sledge across. It was an ordeal of nightmarish proportions. She had to talk him through it, coaxing and encouraging, while she pulled from the other side, the crude ropes taut with the terrifying weight of his life. The tree groaned and shifted under the strain, but it held. When he was finally safe on the other side, they both collapsed, not speaking, united in a shared, breathless relief that went deeper than words. This event forged the final piece of Lara Croft's new identity. She had not only found a path and provided sustenance, she had navigated a lethal obstacle, making a calculated risk, and seeing it through with steady nerves. She had looked into the abyss and not flinched. The young woman who had been fascinated by the past was now a woman who could shape her own present, who could stare down impossible odds and find a way through. The weight she pulled was not just that of her mentor, but the weight of her own destiny, and she was proving strong enough to bear it. Chapter 5. The Emergence of a Legend. The next 2 days were a blur of exhausting travel and dwindling hope, a relentless cycle of pulling the sledge, melting snow, and pushing onward through the thinning air. Von Croy drifted in and out of consciousness, his survival now a race against infection and exposure. Lara's own body was a map of pain, her ribs a constant, dull ache, her muscles screaming with fatigue, her hands raw and cracked from the cold and the constant friction of the ropes. She moved on a kind of autopilot, her mind focused only on the next step, the next breath, the next 100 yards of their descent. The grand adventure of archaeology was forgotten, replaced by the primal, singular goal of seeing another sunrise. Then, on the 3rd day after crossing the crevasse, she smelled it. A change in the air. It was a faint, earthy scent, the smell of wet soil and pine, a perfume so alien after the sterile, icy air of the high peaks that it almost made her dizzy. The stunted trees grew thicker, forming a proper, if sparse, forest. The sound of the wind was different, no longer a lonely howl, but a gentle sigh through branches. And then, through a break in the trees, she saw it. A thin, gray ribbon of smoke rising from a valley far below. Civilization. The sight was so powerful, so unexpected, that her knees buckled, and she sank into the snow, tears of sheer, unadulterated relief freezing on her cheeks. They were found by a group of local herders later that day, men whose weather-beaten faces showed no surprise at finding 2 half-dead foreigners in the high wilderness, as if the mountain regularly spat out such offerings. They spoke in a dialect she didn't understand, but their actions were clear and kind. They took Von Croy from the sledge, carrying him with a gentle efficiency, and gave Lara a warm, thick blanket and a water skin full of a salty, life-giving broth. The journey down to their village was a dreamlike procession, a slow, gentle return to the world she had left behind, a world of warmth, sound, and other human faces. Weeks later, safe in a hospital in Kathmandu, the ordeal began to feel like a strange, vivid dream. Von Croy would survive, though his leg would never fully recover, leaving him with a permanent limp and a profound, complex respect for the student who had saved him. Reporters came, hopping for a sensational story of a Himalayan disaster, but Lara refused them all. She gave a simple, factual account to the authorities and then withdrew, the experience too raw, too personal to be turned into a headline. She didn't want fame, she wanted understanding. She needed to process the fundamental change that had occurred within her. She returned to England, to the quiet, ordered halls of her family's manor, but it felt different. The world outside seemed too soft, too safe, too predictable. The quiet was no longer peaceful, but stifling. Her mind constantly drifted back to the mountains, not to the terror of the crash, but to the intense, vibrant clarity of survival. The feeling of her hands on the ancient stone of the hidden tomb, the strain of her muscles as she pulled the sledge, the sharp, cold air filling her lungs. She had been tested in the most extreme way imaginable, and she had not broken. She had discovered a strength and a resourcefulness she never knew she possessed. One afternoon, she found herself in her father's old study, her hands resting on his large oak desk. She looked at a globe that stood in the corner, and instead of seeing countries and borders, she saw possibilities. She saw hidden tombs in forgotten deserts, lost cities in tangled jungles, secrets waiting in the high, lonely places of the world. The crash had not stolen her future, it had forged it. It had stripped away the non-essential and revealed her true calling. She was not meant to just read about history. She was meant to go out and touch it, to uncover it, to live it. Lara Croft, the society student, was gone. In her place was someone new, someone with a cool, appraising gaze and a soul that thirsted for the unknown. She picked up a pen and opened a fresh, blank journal. On the first page, she wrote a single word, Himba. It was the beginning of her own story. The world thought it had seen the last of her, a lucky survivor of a tragic accident, but they were wrong. The mountain had not killed Lara Croft. It had created her, and her journey was just beginning. And so, the journey ends where it began, not with an end, but with a beginning. The young woman who entered the mountains was gone, and in her place, the legend of Lara Croft was quietly born, not in a moment of triumph, but in the quiet, stubborn will to survive. We hope this story has helped you to let go of your own day, to quiet the noise, and to find a moment of peace. The world of gaming is full of such tales, and we're so glad you chose to spend this time exploring this one with us. If this helped you unwind, please consider subscribing to Gaming Lore for Sleep for more journeys into the quiet heart of your favorite game worlds. wherever you are, we wish you a deep and restorative night's sleep. Good night, and have the sweetest dreams.